I just finished reading back through the last book of the fourth Warriors series, the end of the original arc. I had reread the original series in 2020, but had never reread anything past that since my first read through in middle school. I absolutely loved this series back then, and remember feeling like the original series held up really well when I reread it in 2020. On August 27th, I started rereading the first series, and 6 days later, I'd finished it. I found that I could finish each book in a single sitting of around 2.5 hours. I'd always been able to finish these books in one go as a kid, so it was nice to see that I still had that in me. I hadn't read anything all year up until this. The last book I'd read was Anxious People by Fredrik Backman in early December of last year. But once I started reading back through the Warriors books, I just wanted to keep reading. I found used copies of the second series, and before I knew it, I'd finished that one too, and was still hungry for more. Suddenly, when I had spare time, I found myself wanting to pick up a book and keep reading instead of sitting around mindlessly watching YouTube or whatever. When I finished the second series, I picked up copies of the third series, and when I was finished with that series, a book I'd requested from the library quite a while ago finally came in, We Could Be Rats by Emily Austen. So I picked that up from the library, read it in a day, dropped it back off, and picked right back up with the fourth series. I finished the last book on October 18th. So I went from reading 6 books throughout the entirety of 2024 to reading through 25 books in the span of 7 weeks. And one of them was even a quote-unquote real book. If you, like me, used to be an avid reader, but have found it difficult to want to make time for reading in your adult life, maybe try picking up some old favorites. The books will be easier to read, and if it's part of a series like The Warriors, there will be no shortage of books to read next, making it really easy for reading to find its way back into your life. But what did I think of the books? Clearly I enjoyed them enough to keep reading. The first series is far and away the strongest. It establishes the Warriors' world really well, and has the best overarching narrative. The rivalry between Firestar and Tigerstar works really well as a way to tie the books together and keep things intriguing. The main prophecy of Fire will save the clan is pretty on the nose, and I remember even as a kid finding that way too obvious. But the buildup of both Firestar and Tigerstar's characters is really engaging. One thing I really love about the Warriors books is how they're not afraid of being slow, and that a lot of the runtime is just the daily life of the cats in the clan. But while later series started to spend probably a little too much time meandering through often seemingly pointless side stories, the first series manages to strike a really good balance of filler world building and moments that propel the main plot forward. Another thing I really like about the Warriors books is how they manage to stay very rooted in reality. Even with the mythological aspects of things like StarClan and prophecies, very few cats have much actual plot armor, and cats are often dying or facing real difficulties and dangers. The final battle encapsulates this really well. I think everyone wanted Firestar to kill Tigerstar, but spoiler alert I guess, he doesn't. It's a somewhat unsatisfying moment, but it makes it feel much more real, and just gives Firestar and the readers something else to have to mull over and deal with. There are definitely weak points in the first series, though. Bluestar's abandonment of StarClan and her clan towards the end of her life is largely just frustrating to read through, and there's sometimes a little too much recapping between action. But all in all, the first series is really solid, and absolutely worth a reread if you loved these books as a kid. The second series falters a bit for me because the overarching narrative is much weaker than that in the first series. The first 3 books are dedicated to the journey to and from the Sundrown Place when a cat from each clan is given a vision from StarClan. I don't find the journeying sections to be as engaging to read, and I just miss being a part of the daily clan life drama while on the road. When they do get back, they then have to spend a bit of time convincing the clans to leave, but once the journey to new territory finally begins, it's done in like half a book. Which probably is a good thing, because that journey is even more of a pain to read, because now every challenge is being faced by like 50 cats instead of 6. But it makes it feel somewhat anticlimactic, and is just weirdly paced given how long the initial journey to the Sundrown Place took. Once the cats are in their new territory, I find the books to be much more interesting. But at this point, the series is nearly over. It winds up feeling like there are 2 story arcs instead of just one. First, the journey to Sundrown Place, and then the journey to and establishment of new territories. The last book didn't have the finality of the first series either. It felt like a book 3, not a book 6, and left me anxious to get started on the third series, which was by far the weakest. If the second series floundered a bit because it didn't have a strong overarching narrative, the third series falls flat on its face because it pretty much doesn't have an overarching narrative at all. There's a prophecy saying that 3 kin of Firestar's kin will have the power of the stars in their paws, but what that means is never made clear. And then at the end, we find out that one of the 3 isn't even one of the 3. Nothing that happens in this series feels like it's building towards much of anything at all. There are interesting moments, but everything feels quite disconnected, and nothing has any sort of satisfying conclusion by the end of the 6th book. Individually, I actually preferred the books in the 3rd series over those in the 2nd series. Like I'd said, I didn't really find any of the journeying sections to be all that well written or engaging, and that makes up about half of the 2nd series. But I love reading about daily clan life, and that's really what the bulk of the 3rd series is. But while I was enjoying my time in the clans, I never really knew what I was reading the books for. There was never a clear driving force to keep me wanting more other than my own enjoyment of this world and these characters. Which brings us to the 4th series, the final of the original plotline. I think this series is about on par with, if not slightly better, than the 2nd series. At this point, the books are really leaning quite heavily into the mythological, with the Dark Forest gaining power and threatening both the clans by the lake and StarClan themselves. I enjoy the Dark Forest storyline, but I can't help but feel like all the weight on prophecies and destinies start to get a little in the way. I liked how in the first series, StarClan and the prophecy of fire saving the clan mostly acted as additional flavor, but was never really the main point. That was always the rivalry between Firestar and Tigerstar. It would probably have helped if the prophecy of the 3 was a little clearer in what it meant. Maybe not as on the nose as the original Fire Will Save the Clan prophecy, but at least clear enough that there could be a semblance of an idea of what it might mean before its meaning is finally revealed. And the fact that it just keeps sort of changing too makes it feel a little cheap. The introduction of a 4th cat just felt like too much. Even if that 4th cat being revealed to be Firestar was sort of a cool moment. Up until that reveal, it just made the original prophecy feel even less like something that actually carried any weight to it. A lot of things that happen in the 4th series sort of wind up feeling like they're happening just to justify things that happened in the 3rd series. The return to the tribe cats makes the largely pointless journey there from the 3rd series feel like it actually had some bearing on the prophecy. The ancient cats start to actually feel like they too had some importance to the prophecy and storyline. Soul's return, however, I don't think was handled all that well, as his main gripe against the clans felt cheap. He worked better when his reasonings weren't known beyond a vague desire for power. A false prophet using lion imagery is interesting, and I liked Soul more as he existed in the 3rd series. Probably the only thing I think the 3rd series did better than the 4th. But the final book in the series is the strongest by a wide margin. It wraps up pretty much every single loose end left from all previous books and reaches a satisfying finale. Some stuff feels vaguely fanservice-y, and I don't like Cinderpult's spirit leaving Cinderheart, because why was she even given a second life if the moment she actually started getting to experience the things she hadn't been able to the first time around, she just leaves? But it's honestly impressive how much gets tied up here and how satisfying it all feels. That being said, I didn't like Firestar's death. I may have praised it when our expectations were dashed when Scourge killed Tigerstar instead of Firestar, but I don't think a falling beech tree should have killed Firestar. Tigerstar and Firestar should have killed each other in battle, and Tigerstar should have put up more of a fight against Firestar too. But that's not a huge complaint all things considered, or maybe it is. The death of the cat that is more or less the main protagonist. The death of the cat that is more or less the main protagonist of the entire series probably should have been handled a little bit better. It definitely doesn't ruin the series by any means for me though. I guess what I'm saying is that while I think it could have been handled a little better, it still ultimately made for a good ending, and the last book ends in a way that left me feeling satisfied, which is impressive given just how much that book had to wrap up. The writing itself is mostly utilitarian. You're not going to stop mid-page in awe of the sentence you just read. Every now and then, the authors, because fun fact, Aaron Hunter is actually multiple people, do try to spice things up with some flowery descriptions, but it often comes across as just a bit much. Description for description's sake. Not really serving anything other than to look like good writing. But clearly the writing is strong enough. I fervently read through 24 books and was deeply invested in what I was reading as a 26-year-old. At its worst, the writing is still serviceable. It was never distracting. At the end of the day, these books are intended for middle schoolers after all. In spite of that, however, they don't hold back. These books are often surprisingly graphic and deal with a lot of very real and traumatic incidents, like life-altering injuries, death during childbirth, and just a whole lot of death in all sorts of shapes and sizes. The violence and graphic nature of some scenes never feels gratuitous, though. It serves to make the world feel more grounded, and the threats feel more real. That being said, while only a few moments ago I'd said the writing was never distracting, that's not entirely true. It often felt to me like the wrong verb tense was being used. It was always ed verbs, so like leaped instead of leapt. That one in particular always stood out to me. Maybe I'm wrong, and that's the right verb tense, but it felt like maybe simpler tenses were being used because it was being assumed the reader might not have learnt more advanced verb tenses yet. Are verb tenses even taught like that for English though? I took French immersion and we spent a lot of time on verb tenses. Even in high school we were still learning new verb tenses. I don't feel like English works quite the same way though. It's more intrinsic for verbs, right? I feel like middle schoolers could have handled leapt. Or maybe I'm just completely wrong and leaped is right. These books also use a lot of unique language to paint the world through the perspective of the cats, and I think it works really well. It's also sort of cool how in later series we meet cats that have their own take on these words, like how the clan cats call people two legs, but then we eventually meet Purdy who calls them upwalkers. Though sometimes the fact that these words were seemingly intended to be regional does seem to be forgotten. Given the huge cast of characters, the books do a good job of giving each cat enough unique traits that, for the most part, they're memorable enough that you can have a sense of who's who without needing to glance back to the character list at the start. However, a lot of character moments do sort of come out of nowhere, like Brambleclaw suddenly deciding he wants to be deputy so bad it hurts. A lot of relationships are like this too. Cats just suddenly start liking one another without any real build-up or signs beforehand. So the first series is by far the strongest when looked at as a series. It was written to be a standalone series of 6 books, and it reads that way. The second series has some awkward pacing and isn't as tightly written as the first, but it still feels more closely related to the more grounded reality that the first series exists in, and it's the last time we're in the original territories, so that counts for something. The third series has books that are individually more enjoyable than most of the second series, but really flounders as a series. At this point, you can tell the books are being written with the understanding that there will be more, and often it feels like things are being set up just to be explored further in a side story or future series. The fourth series feels much more narratively cohesive than the third, and is only weakened slightly by its need to tie up so many of the loose ends that the third series left behind. Its overarching narrative comes very close to being as strong as the original series, but is made a little less satisfying by the reliance on prophecies and destinies for me personally. Before wrapping up, I just have a few sort of scattered thoughts to throw in at the end here. One thing that really helps make these books so cool are the maps and character lists at the start. I was able to pick up the original prints of the first and second series, but had to do with reprints of the third. In Great StarClan, not only do the covers look significantly worse in my opinion, but so do the new maps. The fact that the two-leg map now shares the same art style as the cat map makes having 2 maps seem largely superfluous. But having these here at all, even with the lame new art style, just makes these books feel all that much more special. I think it's interesting that there were never any queer-coded cats. Maybe there are in future series, but not in the original storyline. I feel like there's a large amount of representation in the cast of characters, but never any queer cats. Apparently, according to a quick Google search of "Are cats gay?", homosexual behavior has been observed in cats in real life, so it's not like it would be unrealistic. And I feel like the struggle of coming to terms with one's sexuality would fit right into the kinds of character struggles we see in these books. Hollyleaf is definitely autistic coded though, right? At least her behavior prior to her reappearance. Alright, I think that's about it. I could probably keep talking about these books for a while yet. I mean, I just read 24 of them. But I'm gonna stop it here for now. I'm definitely glad I jumped back into the Warriors world to reread these books. It was a lot of fun, and helped make reading feel like a part of my life again. So go there and reread a childhood favorite. Why not?